I'm Luke Babbage here at VentureBeat's Blueprint 2018 conference in Reno, Nevada, and I'm here with David Hall, partner at Revolution's Rise of the Rest fund. David, can you give us a quick introduction to the origin of the fund as it was started by Revolution?
Sure. So Revolution has been around for over a decade, and about 4 years ago, we started going on tour, visiting what we called Rise of the Rest cities. These were cities that were outside of the more traditional ecosystems of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston, but had something about the city that was interesting, something about the entrepreneurial ecosystem that was beginning to sort of take off. And we wanted to go see it. We wanted to go meet the people that were leading that charge in some of these markets. And so we over time have toured now 33 different cities, from Nashville to New Orleans, from Portland, Maine to Indianapolis, and have learned and met lots of really interesting entrepreneurs, public policy leaders, economic development authority folks, ecosystem heads, politicians, and all of them all working together to sort of lift and raise the entrepreneurial ecosystem of a lot of these cities. So that was the genesis. We then transitioned from there to raise a proper fund, because we recognized that one of the big things that was lacking was capital. And the fastest way to get these ecosystems to rise was by injecting capital directly into the ecosystem and the companies that sort of make up these ecosystems. So we started, again, the Rise of the Rest Seed Fund, raising $150 million, all focused on the bulk of those investments being outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston.
Right, and you guys are trying to change some of the macro trends. Right now, 75% of venture capital is going to just 3 cities.
3 states.
3 states, sorry. And how do you see Rise of the Rest changing that dynamic? And what's the time frame for doing it?
Yeah, so I think the first and most important thing is just helping to change the narrative in some of these cities, so that it's not woe is me Detroit, but it's like, wow, there's some amazing things happening in Detroit. Look at these companies which just got venture financing by Revolution's Rise of the Rest Fund and others, and the hope is that is catalytic capital for other people to come in and also be participate, help find and nurture these companies. And for us, a critical component of that is partnering with the local entrepreneurs and local investors, so that they know these companies. They're able to help us first identify, and then work with these companies as they begin to scale and need either coastal connections or C-suite recruiting, things that sort of fast-growing companies need that they necessarily can't find locally.
And so part of your model is Rise of the Rest is not taking board seats, not leading funding rounds the way other VC funds might. Why is that? Where does that fit into your approach to finding and growing these companies?
Sure. The notion for us is we'd prefer our capital to be catalytic. We prefer to help these companies sort of build the local critical mass and critical infrastructure to be able to scale quickly. And the best way to do that is not to sort of mire it down in process, but also, and most importantly, like I said earlier, work with the local investors who know these companies, have known often the entrepreneurs through their previous exits and previous entrepreneurial activities, and then be there with a seat at the table as the company begins to scale. So we obviously would love our first check-in to sort of partner with other investors, but we want to be there to support the company as it continues to scale in its Series B and C and D rounds and all.
And something that Rise of the Rest talks a lot about is this idea of network density, and how one of the great strengths of a city like San Francisco is that you're meeting someone who can introduce you to your next employee, your next investor, your next hire.
Yes.
Why do you think network density is so essential, and what's the first step for mid-tier cities to build that network density?
So, look, network density to me has a lot of different nodes. First, it's when if you theoretically landed in a city at the airport, and you wanted to start a company, where's the first place you go? And most cities need a place. In Silicon Valley, it could be a coffee shop in Silicon Valley. You literally will bump into somebody who you can tell your idea to, and on a napkin get financing. That doesn't happen in New Orleans. That doesn't happen in Raleigh, Durham. But by looking as a region, not just a city, not just sort of a community, but thinking more densely about the region, not only can you create those types of connections that are important for growing that initial company, but also it's attractive to investors in Silicon Valley, in New York, that says, wow, there are lots of opportunities if I don't look at sort of Raleigh, but if I look at Raleigh plus Durham plus Chapel Hill as a network, I can fly there, I can fill my day with meetings and meet people. The other big piece of this is obviously on recruiting, right? The network density really helps. We've heard a lot at the conference that recruiting recruiting employees so that they have their second or third job possibility available to them only happens when you think about a larger network. And so fostering these larger networks, even if they're sort of loosely stitched together by different communities, but still thought of as sort of one geographic network, really helps from recruiting investors, recruiting talent, and even just sort of putting the city on the map in a much more important and more meaningful way.
And certainly a lot of cities right now see themselves as having a funding gap. Mid-tier cities feel the pain of needing more access to capital for their entrepreneurs. So what can people working in economic development, trying to foster innovation ecosystems, and startups, entrepreneurs in those ecosystems, do to put themselves on the map for your fund and funds like it?
So one of the great fortuitous benefits of sort of what we've been living through with the Amazon HQ2 event is that 230 cities have basically written an economic development plan for how to recruit startups, right? They just had it focused on one startup, and like our chairman Steve Case has written, like now it's time to take that plan and divide it into 20 pieces, and instead of funding one big startup, think about ways to provide opportunities and benefits for 20 or 30 startups, or even just 5. And just by creating that leaning in on the different levers available for fostering the ecosystem is something that any city can do. And frankly, luckily, a lot of cities already have that plan that's already written.
And in terms of macroeconomic trends, we've been talking a lot at the Blueprint Conference about the future of work, how remote work is changing the game, changing the landscape for cities, and how they should be thinking about what it means to have a future-proofed talent base. How does that play into your investment thesis? Why do you think these mid-tier cities are such a strong opportunity? And where will they fit into the broader macroeconomic landscape of the United States in the future?
Well, I mean, look, we've got some tough problems to solve as a country, both for consumers and for businesses. As you know, we had a great talk by Tim O'Reilly the other day on sort of the challenges that we're going to face, but it's not because machines are going to be able to solve all of our problems. We've got to first make sure that we're training our people to do the work for tomorrow. We're invested in a company out of Baltimore called Catalyte that basically turns lay people, retrains them as software developers. So you can go from an artist and with their training come out of the other side as a software developer. That's really cool, really important work. But the macro trend largely of that is really rethinking what the workforce needs to look like, rethinking how that talent needs to be dispersed geographically. We see all the time what's called the boomerang of talent, where people graduate from Michigan, go work in Silicon Valley as an engineer for a couple of years, and then realize either because of life circumstance, like they're having babies and children and want a bigger backyard, or even opportunity, or even getting sandwiched between their children and their parents and want to go home again. Like, there's now the opportunity for them to take what they've been trained to do in engineering or software development and now go home. And so that's a huge benefit to the ability of democratizing this tech playing field, which has only historically been limited to people in a handful of markets around the country. So we feel like the time is now, we feel like the opportunity is now, we feel like the investment appetite is now, and so we're super excited to be running quickly to try to capture some of it.
And the last thing I wanted to ask about, on the panel just now at the Blueprint Conference, you talked about how important it is for cities, funders, entrepreneurs to accept failure and see the value in the risks inherent in a failure.
Sure.
Now, do you think that that culture is something that can be brought from Silicon Valley, where you said it was exemplified, to other mid-tier cities? Is that something that's teachable?
I think it is learned. I mean, I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, a place that knows about rebuilding after hurricanes, that knows about how to manage resources really well. But one thing that's a struggle for a lot of these places is looking at and understanding and appreciating the lessons that can be learned from failure. The idea that you can make a mistake once, but as long as you don't continue to make that same mistake, that's progress. And the Valley does that so well, and entrepreneurs. I've heard venture capitalists say they won't fund somebody until they've had at least one failure, because the lessons learned from that are just better than the best MBA from the best business school. And so, being able to apply that and learn that and teach ecosystems how to do that. It starts from the seed level and the angel level. When you bring angels into a deal, they have to recognize that there can be losses here. But if it's learned and if it's sort of really ingested and appreciated by the ecosystem, it can have such positive results, so that failure isn't seen as a bad thing, but a positive thing, and helps progress the company and the idea, and then by default, the ecosystem 2 steps forward.
So, last thing, where can people find you? You're out there doing amazing work, touring the United States.
Sure.
Hopefully St. Louis is on the roadmap for you guys.
Already been to St. Louis.
Any plans to come back?
Always looking to go back to St. Louis, and have a couple of companies in the pipeline from St. Louis as well.
Terrific.
So really excited. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at dhall3. So I'm always on Twitter, and you can find me at revolution.com.
Terrific. Everyone follow along as Rise of the Rest is investing catalytic capital in cities, mid-tier cities across the United States, building this network density that allows ecosystems to thrive. And remember to learn from failure as entrepreneurs, as companies, and as communities. David, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot, Luke.
Really a
This was fun.
pleasure. Again, I'm Luke Babich from Entrepreneur Quarterly, coming to you from Reno, Nevada. We're at the VentureBeat Blueprint Conference. Thanks again.
Thanks.